Hi friends, welcome back to my channel. My name is Alex. I'm a passionate language learner and the founder of Linguamers. I work as a civil engineer during the week, and today I would like to talk about the topic of forgetting a language. I'll talk about in what situations this might happen, what this might look like, and what might actually be happening. So let's dive into it. Forgetting a language is something that might have happened to a lot of us or to people that you know, and it can happen in various situations. One possibility is, for example, that you have lived in a certain country for a few years, and when you lived there you learned the language and you spoke that language, but then after a few years you moved back to your original country and you haven't been speaking the language ever since, and now it's been 10-15 years and you feel like you don't know that language anymore. Another common thing, especially among us polyglots, is that on the way to learning a lot of languages, it becomes a bit difficult at some point to give equal attention to every language. And there are some languages that we might have studied a lot 10 years ago, but we haven't really been studying them recently, and we feel like we don't know that language anymore. And that is certainly something that has happened to me as well. In my case, I studied Japanese quite intensively from about 12 years ago for 4 years, which means until 8 years ago. And so I haven't really been learning or using much Japanese in the last 8 years. And it has happened recently that I was sometimes in a situation where I had to speak Japanese, and I was just really surprised how much I struggled to speak it. And it is certainly a rather demoralizing thing. This has happened to me with also other languages, but what's actually happening there? I think what we need to distinguish is forgetting a language and being out of practice. The fact that I really struggled to speak Japanese doesn't necessarily mean that I forgot so many words. It might be that I was just out of practice. Because when I then heard certain words and I was told what they mean, my reaction was all the time, oh yeah, right, that's what it means. Now it's coming back again. So I realized that a lot of these words and a lot of expressions, they were still there. I was just out of practice. But the fact that I had studied the language intensively 8 to 12 years ago, something will always be there. It will never disappear entirely. It's exactly like if you once learned how to ski or how to play football or so. If you then don't play it for 10 years or you don't ski for 10 years, you will be out of practice. But you'll always be much better than you were when you had just started to learn how to ski. And this is the next big factor that might influence our perception of the fact that we have forgotten a language. I think that we as humans often look at things in relative terms. So whether we know a language well or not, we don't look at it so much in absolute terms that I know this language well, but we compare ourselves to how well do I know this language compared to last year, compared to the past, or compared to another person. And this is why when we start learning a language, we often have quite high motivation because we are constantly at a higher level than we were before. Our level is constantly increasing, and so we feel that we're always getting better and better and better. But in absolute terms, when we start learning a language, we're still very, very low. And my current level in Japanese, which I haven't spoken in 8 years, is probably still higher than my Japanese was after I had studied it for one year. But I feel like it is quite poor because I struggle to speak it much more now than I did 6-7 years ago. So this might influence our perception of our current level a lot. but it does not mean that our absolute level is necessarily lower. So this is an important factor to keep in mind. There are certainly people who claim that they have completely forgotten a language that they haven't used in many years. But I haven't personally met any, and I would be interested in knowing how they really forgot the language, or whether they really did forget the language. Because in my experience, at least those languages that I haven't used in a long time, it is, as I said, that it is much more a question of being out of practice rather than actually forgetting the language. Yes, I might not remember certain words anymore, but it is not like I've never heard those words. It's just that when I hear them again, they immediately make sense. I immediately remember them, and then they will really stick in my long-term memory. In my experience, there is on the language learning journey a certain point where after we get over that point, over that hurdle, we have then reached a level where we really will never fall back to not knowing the language anymore. So I think that dropping back to a level where you don't remember anything of the language, I think that's only possible if you never reached a basic level, if you never reached a level in the language where you understood the foundations of the language, a level in which you have listened to the language, in which you have understood the basic ways of expressing yourself. If you have reached that, if you have, through your language learning journey, gone through a situation where you listened to the language for an extended period of time, and therefore gave the opportunity to the language to ingrain itself into you, then I think it will be very difficult to really forget the language. So when that happens, I think it might most often be in situations where somebody only learned a language in class, where they never listened much to the language, they never spoke it, they only learned grammatical concepts and some grammatical rules, and they never actually learned the language. And that is something that actually has happened to me only with Latin. Latin is the only language which I studied in school and where I feel like I know hardly anything anymore. And interestingly, the only thing that I remember of Latin now are mostly grammar rules. And that is because that was mostly what we studied. When we studied Latin at school, we mostly just learned grammar rules. That's all we did. And we would translate some texts every now and then. But the main focus there when translating a text was always, do you know if this is a plusquamperfect, second person singular, or something like that? And I think that is the example of really forgetting a language, because I never spent time listening to the language, because I never spoke it, which with Latin is also difficult to do. But that is the only language where that has happened to me. But any other language that I've studied, I have always spent some time listening to the language. I have always spent time speaking the language. That is also the case with languages where I have a very low level, like Persian or like Danish. But I still have a basis in those languages, which I build myself when I learn them. So building yourself that basis is the necessary step to not forgetting a language. In my case, I haven't been learning Japanese for a long time, as I mentioned, and the same is also true for Swedish and for Russian, which I studied a lot 8 years ago, 6 years ago, and I haven't used ever since. And I watched some old videos of myself where I spoke Swedish, and it is a bit demoralizing, of course, to hear myself speaking Swedish in a way that I know I would never be able to speak now. But I was also surprised how quickly you can get back to the level that you had. When you start speaking a language again after 8 years, you may be surprised how much is gone, but you can also be really surprised how quickly it'll come back again. I went back to studying Russian again, and I studied it a little bit every day. And after 1 month, I was definitely back to the level that I had before. And after 3 months, I was at a higher level than I had ever been. So that's the good news, that when you haven't been using a language for a long time, getting back into it is, in my experience at least, much faster than we might think. Thanks a lot for watching this video. I hope you found a lot of useful and interesting information in it. If you haven't yet done so, please subscribe to my channel, like this video, and I'll see you next time. Take care.